All right, here with me now to discuss is CNN medical analyst Dr. Shanlon Matthew and CNN legal analyst Shanlon Wu. Good to see both of you. All right, Shan, you first. So what legal authority does the president have to declare churches essential and to also force governors to reopen them?
Right, Fred, there's basically no legal authority for the president to force the governors of the states to open. The 10th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution reserves rights to the states under our principles of federalism, and President Trump has no basis upon which he can force the governors or mayors to do anything. And we've seen that throughout the COVID-19 pandemic because it is the state and local authorities who have been leading the way in terms of orders, stay-at-home regulations, and the like. And that, of course, makes sense because they understand the local conditions. So he lacks any legal authority to force that. It's really part of his usual sort of blustering, trying to assume more power. And they're already walking that back. I mean,
and you look at the map. You look at the map here, Shan, the president really may be only referring to 3 states because the majority of the states have reopened houses of worship. You know, some are in the middle of, reopening completely. There are some restrictions in place, but does it sound as though the president is really trying to take credit for the majority of the states that have already opened them and just threatening the 3 that have restrictions in place?
It certainly sounds like he's trying to do that. His spokesperson already backed away from the position, reiterating the governors have the decision on what to do. Now, there are some interesting constitutional questions as to whether it's unconstitutional to force the churches to close. But I think at this point, as you pointed out, Fred, it's a foregone conclusion. They're going to start to open.
Okay. And of course, the press secretary for the White House is saying it's unconstitutional, for any other state to do otherwise. So, Dr. Matthew, in your view, what does need to take place for houses of worship to ensure everyone's safety?
Yeah. Hi, Frederica. Nice to be back on your show. When I think about the church, I think of the church as a completely different place, an area than, say, a grocery store. In a grocery store, you've got people kind of moving in and around you. In a church, technically, if you can avoid a lot of the members congregating in the lobby, once they are seated, if they're 6 feet apart and wearing a mask, I think that it might be doable. We all have to find what a new normal is, Frederica, and of course a lot of churches are hurting without income, pastors are hurting, so I understand that they need to go back. But I think those guidelines of wearing a mask, making sure that you're 6 feet apart at all times and not congregating in the lobby and maybe even doing away with certain rituals like the sign of peace, like they do in my parents' church.
Yeah, something like, half of the churches are suffering as a result of not being able to, take offerings, receive donations. So, Dr. Matthew, let's switch gears and talk about vaccines now. Oxford University says its vaccine trial is progressing rather very well, and it's now moving to the next 2 phases. So how significant is this that the next 2 phases are in sight?
Oh, pretty significant, Frederica. If you look at the history of vaccines, we've never developed a vaccine in a year. The quickest vaccine has been for mumps, which took 4 years. Most vaccines take 5 to 10 years. I'm optimistic. I'm not 100% sure, Frederica, that we'll have the vaccines not only effective and ready to go, but also we have to ramp up production for 8 billion people in the world and make sure that everybody has access to it. So I'm optimistic. I still think it will take 12 to 15 months.
Dr. Matthew, let's talk about this hydroxychloroquine. The president has said that he has been taking it to fend off, coronavirus, but hadn't the discussions been that hydroxychloroquine may be helpful to the most severe of coronavirus patients? And now researchers are actually saying that drug may not be as good as the president has touted because it could cause heart problems. So why would the president be using it as a prophylactic in the first place?
Yeah, I want to make one thing clear, Frederica. President Trump is taking the drug, as he says, for prophylaxis, as you just mentioned, which means how can I avoid getting COVID-19 in the first place? There is a clinical trial going on right now. We still don't know the results of that study, and it's really meant more for frontline workers who are exposed to the disease every single day. The other study that was released yesterday is one of the largest studies of hydroxychloroquine that actually says that not only is there any benefits, there is harm. It increases your risk of certain cardiac arrhythmias and actually causes increased risk of death. So this is a pretty large study that we've never had before. And for me, as a physician, I'm pretty convinced that this is not a drug that we should be using in sick patients with COVID-19.
So Shan, back to the vaccine issue, if it does become available, what legal protection, if at all, do people have to ensure that they are not overlooked, that they too would have access?
Sure. Well, any vaccine is only good if you can get to it. And what people have to be aware of is that Title VI of the Civil Rights Act makes sure that any program, Medicare, Medicaid, that receives federal funding has to not discriminate in how they give out that health care to people. So for historically disadvantaged communities like the Native American community, we know the Navajo Nation has suffered terribly during COVID-19. Their basic access to health care is problematic, and that access is going to cause a disparate treatment to them. But anyone who notices a specific type of discrimination, barring them from getting health care or vaccines, they can report that to their state Department of Health and also to the Department of Health and Human Services, the federal agency, through their Office of Civil Rights.
All right, Shanlon Wu, Dr. Saju Matthew, we'll leave it there for now. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Frederica.